thank you so much for agreeing to do this author talk with the Stockton-San Joaquin County Public Library. If you wouldn't mind, could you introduce yourself and say what kind of novels you write?
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me, and thanks to anyone who might be watching this. My name is Paula Treick DeBoard, and I'm a fiction writer. I write realistic fiction, I guess I would call it. They sometimes fall into the mystery or drama categories. I like to call them could be real fiction. Like, it could happen. It'd be kind of horrible if it did, but it could happen.
So could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in a little town in Ohio, Napoleon, Ohio, and moved out here when I was about 10. And I've lived, California is kind of my home base, but I went to college in Iowa and I went to grad school in Maine. But I married a California boy who's from the Valley, and we kind of made our home here.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you started out as a writer, or when you knew this was going to be your preferred career?
Yeah, I think I was just always that weird kid that was kind of, I'm a little solitary in nature, I think. Not quite as solitary as this pandemic has made me be, but solitary. And I think that started when I was very young, and I was always reading and like scribbling little stories in notebooks. And my mom tells this story that when we took a cross-country trip when I was 9, that I wrote my first novel in the back of our station wagon. And she had to help me with all the spellings of everything. I was always like kind of determined to do some writing, and I went to college. I was an English major. I ended up going into teaching while I was trying to figure out, what kind of things I wanted to write and how I was going to do that and support myself. And so I taught high school. I taught everything from high school English, junior high. I taught at Delta College in Stockton. And I teach at UC Merced now. But through all of that has been this thread of like, I'm going to write a book. And I took some time off from teaching, and from 2008 to 2010, I got a master's degree in creative writing. And I went with the intention of, this is going to hold my feet to the fire. If I'm paying money for this and I'm taking time away from the family for this, I'm going to come out of this with a book. And so I did write my first draft of a book during that time, and it wasn't published until 2013. But yeah, I was finally like, okay, I can do this. I can actually finish something that I start, which is always.
Did your station wagon novel have a title?
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard this story before, but interestingly enough, the title of that book was The Morning Hours, which was the first book that I ever actually published in 2013. I gave it that same title, which seemed appropriate, although it was a very different book.
I know you talked about it a little bit, about how you wanted to be a writer, but how did you kind of find your writer's voice or your genre of this could be real fiction?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, they say, I'm going to totally mess up this quote because I don't know who said it and exactly what it was, but there's so many hours that you have to put into something, like 50,000 hours or something before you become an expert in something. And I don't know if that's really necessarily quantifiable, but I think for me, I just had to write and figure it out. And so there's a lot of really bad writing in my history as well, of like me figuring things out and going, that doesn't sound right. And I don't think that I can write that anything. And I think I just kind of gravitated toward a certain type of story. I read all kinds of fiction, but I do like things that have, I don't know, some kind of suspenseful element to them. Not strict suspense, but any kind of story I'm looking for. I'm like, I want something that's going to make me keep turning pages and try to figure something out. And I guess another, I don't know how people will feel about me when they hear this, but I'm a true crime fan. Not that I approve of crime, but I'm fascinated by it. Why are people doing these things? Who would do that? What does it mean for these people when this happens to them? Like, I'm kind of like always into those kinds of stories, and I try to capture a little bit of that. And like, sometimes that's just like a seed for where I start my own story. Yes.
That's awesome. So if there are any local authors who are tuning into this, do you have any advice for them?
I would just say, first of all, read everything you can get your hands on. And I think it's kind of, sometimes we kind of limit ourselves as writers a little bit to read just from like one genre. I think this is what teaching has done for me too, is it's made me have to read in all these different genres because I might be teaching in them. So it might be poetry one day. I'm reading a memoir right now. I think all of those things just kind of form the writing mind. Like they give you like some rich, fertile ground to work with. So I would say read in every genre you can, and like put yourself in a position where you can write. And by that, I don't mean necessarily like, oh, you need to go live in a cabin by yourselves. That might work for some people. It's not practical for all of us. We have other concerns in our life. So I guess I would say, carve out a little bit of time for yourself to do this, because that's the hardest thing about writing today, especially when you're writing on your laptop and then you have your social media account pop up. Like, how do you stay away from that? There's all kinds of temptations and all kinds of well-meaning people who will pull you away from your writing and make you do things with them. But carve out some time for yourself and just let yourself do it.
Would you mind telling us what you're reading?
Yeah, let me see if I can get that title right. I think it's called You Need to Talk to Someone. It's by Lori Gottlieb, and she's a therapist, and she's writing about like her own experiences being a patient in therapy. I'm like kind of fascinated by how people's minds work. And so that one, I thought that's really interesting. And I have no formal training at all in psychology. So for me, this is like it's an outsider peeking into her world. It's been kind of cool. So I'm about 100 pages from the end, and it's so good right now. So
I will have to mark that down for my to-read list. And then would you mind reading us a little excerpt from one of your novels?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking, I wanted to find something that was kind of short and kind of also showed what I like to do in my writing. So I'm just going to read the very beginning of The Drowning Girls. So this is a really like short little segment that kind of sets up the story. So yeah, this is written from Liz, the main character's point of view. Someone was screaming. For a moment, with the ceiling fan whirring quietly over my head, I allowed myself to believe it was a benign sound. The kids next door in their play structure, maybe, sliding and swinging and climbing, their voices carrying on a breeze. I propped myself up on my elbows, blinking myself awake. How long had I been sleeping? 20 minutes? An hour? The tank top I was wearing was streaked with dust and damp with sweat. Dizzy, I focused on my bare feet where chipped red polish dotted my toes. On the dresser was a nearly empty bottle of Riesling, a slick ring of condensation bubbling on the wood. I reached a hand onto Phil's side of the bed, groping and coming up empty. Of course, Phil was gone, and he'd taken everything with him. Armfuls of shirts and pants, suit coats and blazers, slippery mounds of ties and belts, even the dry cleaning in its plastic sheeting. Shoes, too, wingtips, loafers, sneakers, the pair of black Converse I'd never once seen him wear. He'd taken the neatly folded stacks of t-shirts and boxers, the lumps of paired socks, the heavy woolen sweater that smelled like a Greek fishing village, or at least how I imagined a Greek fishing village would smell, briny and deep down damp. After he left, I'd searched the floor for a button, a collar stay, a lonely sock, as if I could keep that one discarded thing as evidence of our life together. For a long time, I'd wanted to go back, to pin our relationship to a wall and study it like a specimen from every angle. I wanted to be able to say, here, this is where it all went wrong. This was the point at which the inevitable was not yet inevitable. That was a long time ago, months now. I shook my head, chasing away the thoughts, and heard the screams again over relentless pounding of bass. Was the television on downstairs? That was the simple explanation, and for a moment I allowed myself to be reassured by the thought of actors following a script, raising their voices on cue. And then I remembered. The girls. Pool. The screams were coming from outside, distorted by the triple-paned windows as if they were being filtered through a kaleidoscope, splitting and fracturing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and moved toward the door. My head pounded, an angry thing. Danielle, my baby. No, not a baby. 15 and so angry we barely exchanged more than a sentence in a month. I stumbled on the stairs, catching myself with a hand on the rail. Steady, Liz. I had to navigate around the stacks of boxes in the foyer marked towels and office and, helpfully, stuff. Closer now, the screams became words and the words became language, mixed with the thumping of the stereo, the music that had been playing all afternoon. Help! Mom! Oh my God, no! I yanked open the sliding door, catching my foot on the frame in my hurry. A bright bloom of pain flowered in my vision. After the interior darkness, the outside was a trick of sunlight, bright against the water, a shimmering, endless blue. I squinted into the glare, trying to understand what I was seeing. It looked at first like a game of tug-of-war, a three-headed, six-armed monster writhing in the water. Of course, it wasn't a game. It was another inevitable, a thing that had been coming and coming, a thing I'd let come. There were 3 girls in the water, and one of them was limp, her head flopped forward, blonde hair plastered over her face. Still the shouts came, an unrelenting swirl of voices. In that half second while my mind puzzled, before my body could snap into action, I realized that the loudest voice, the one that couldn't stop screaming, belonged to me. That's the intro to The Drowning Girls.
I have to say, that would keep me turning the pages. I'm going to have to check this out from the library. I know we have quite a few books of yours in our library system. If any viewers, if you would like to read any of these, you can check them out on Libby, which is our digital library, and you can also check them out from our physical library as well.